Anastasia, could you recount more about it, at least about things that can be said in public, in open access? After all, there are many smart people for whom a hint is sufficient, a tip on the direction in which to search so that they could independently come to an understanding of the essence of this matter so that they could find the keys. Rigdon, I can go into more detail, of course. Unfortunately, people consider love to be anything, from the selfish instinct of the alpha male and the alpha female to relationships between spouses, parents, and children, and to moral responsibility before their kin, society, country and so on. But all these are conventions. True love is a very powerful force, much greater than people imagine. It can be said that the current understanding of love is limited in the minds of most people by the templates from childhood. For the masses, this is mostly a game within certain conventions, taking into account local traditions. Regarding these issues, the society has always possessed information that was both accessible and inaccessible to the public. The accessible information focused on the government and public interests. It was spread among the masses to propagate certain behavior patterns that were favorable to the structures possessing the restricted information. Classified information was used extensively in a variety of structures associated with power, especially of the religious, occult direction. It was based on specific knowledge about the invisible world that made it possible to gain additional power and influence over the masses. An important role in this information is given to one of the most powerful energies in the human body, conditionally, let us call it the sexual energy. The accessible information regarding this issue, as a rule, is either looped on man's animal nature or is limited in a certain way by taboos with primitive explanations that draw people far away from the essence of the question. As a result, a person either falls into a frenzied lust and lechery or suffers from mental self-criticism and excessive restrictions during the bursts of this energy. This happens because a person does not understand his nature and lacks sufficient knowledge about this power. In both cases, he ends up not getting the long-awaited happiness and inner spiritual peace but feels, as a rule, emptiness or overexertion. Sexual energy is one of the most powerful forces influencing an individual. You can see its power if you trace the corresponding conscious or subconscious interpretation of wishes in a person's thoughts. Simply put, if people had thought about the salvation of their soul during the day as much as they think about sex, everyone would have already become saints a long time ago. Power is power, and it all depends on who uses it and how, what one concentrates his attention on. If a person uses it in the context of domination of the animal nature, it turns into a cult of self-significance, lust, aggression, and evidence that you are an alpha male or an alpha female. In the consumer society, everything boils down, like in a children's game, to the unfailing possession of the most beautiful toy that everybody wants. After a person is fed up with this toy, another chase for another beautiful toy begins until a person sees something even better. There is no end to such desires. Note that the same desire, to possess the best and the most attractive, is manifested in both men and women in other areas, cars, apartments, clothes, and so on. The root of all this is the animal nature which is always seeking power and acquisition of the temporary, the finite, and the earthly. And in a global sense, the winner is the animal mind, which in such a way, with another set of illusions, makes people spend life energy on and give attention to the mortal instead of focusing on their spiritual salvation. Anastasia, basically, people feed attention to their enemy who is, in fact, killing them. Rigdon, yes. For any intelligent person, it is logical to assume that since a person has sexual energy and it is manifested not only in connection with the instinct of procreation, but it also has powerful psychological, physiological, and other influences on him during life, this means its creating power occupies an important place in both the visible and the invisible human structures. After all, what is a surge of hormones? It is a formation of chemical compounds as derived from the work of energies, that is, of more advanced physics. Moreover, the thought is the activator. By the way, the word hormone, hormao, when translated from Greek, means exactly I excite, I bring into action. Hormones, as biologically active substances, start producing changes in the organism, affecting all the vital processes in the body. And we are talking about what is already known to people at the level of physiology, that is, the visible world, visible matter. Now imagine what this force represents to the invisible world in which subtle effects and transformations take place and from which, in fact, everything is born. In the spiritual aspect, the sexual energy is the force and the conductor to the deepest feelings, let's say, into the world of mysteries of the Supreme. This special knowledge, one way or another, is present in many traditional religions and beliefs of different peoples of the world. And perhaps, I will explain this in more detail. True love is the person's deepest feelings which cannot be expressed in words. It is the power of the soul, its state of love for God. True love between people begins when one person experiences the deepest feelings of love for the soul of another person, when, as they say, one sees the essence of another, when there is a wonderment in silence. Do you see the difference? This state is very different from the usual common sexual burst of a human being who is also dominated by the animal nature when a person wishes to possess, dominate, and use another person for his own selfish purposes. It is significantly different from a psychological concept that is expressed as the domination of some instant moods, shaky feelings, or many greedy wants. All of this often happens when a person is under the illusion that he supposedly dominates over someone, or gives all of himself but does not get a reciprocal feeling, when he demonstrates constant torment in his behavior in the name of some ideal which is, in fact, invented by him. Although in practice he is not experiencing the real selfless love but is trying to show his alpha significance to himself and to others. In relationships, all this sooner or later turns into misunderstanding and tension, generates hatred and enmity, as it is based not on the real deepest feeling but on the desires of the animal nature. Again, in such a case, a person starts blaming everyone and everything, but himself. However, all this shows that he is just asserting his own ego and that he does not actually know how to love, but demands such love for himself. That is, war and peace begin, first of all, in consciousness. The human's problem is that he does not want to work on himself, to produce real, spiritual love on his own, the same love that his soul feels for God. After all, for the rapid spiritual growth of the personality, it is like a vivifying moisture for a ripening ear of grain. True love is a generous inner gift which one person presents to another because of an abundance of the deepest feelings. Such love can be given when you forget about yourself. It is about this love that they say that it is patient, forgiving, not envious, not proud, not self-seeking, and thinks no evil. True love is restoring the unity of souls. A loving person sees kinship in the other and the beauty of his soul. When a person is in the state of true love, he sees more not of the superficial beauty, in other words, mental or physical beauty of another person, his talents or abilities, but of the inner beauty of his spiritual nature. In this case, he begins to see another person from a completely different angle. That person also undergoes a noticeable transformation. Imagine if the latter behaved aggressively towards the outside world. All of a sudden, someone sees not an evil but a kind person in him. Instead of his bad qualities, he notices the good ones. That is, he notices his spiritual beauty which is also in him, but which was not dominant in his consciousness. Thanks to this sincere feeling, the person not only begins to unfold but also to change for the better, with his consciousness dwelling in a full chalice of love. People who wish to follow the spiritual path should not waste time waiting for someone to come one day and sincerely love them. They should learn how to unfold love inside themselves, love for God, for the soul, and then it will be reflected in the surrounding world. It will let them see people from the perspective of their spiritual beauty. Everything is actually closer than people can imagine. Anastasia, yes, there is an impression that the basic knowledge of what true love is has been lost. The masses were only left with traditions without understanding the essence. For example, In the Orthodox tradition, during the wedding service, there is a prayer asking the grace of heaven to come upon the man and the woman who decided to unite their destinies and to transform human relationships into the heavenly ones. Bearing in mind what you have just said, these are not mere words. Rigdon, absolutely. The point here is in the very essence, the mystery of the soul. When two people show true love towards each other, when they are united in their deepest feelings, even the physical union, bodily communication, the connection of the human flesh, only helps, as they say in the Orthodoxy, to reveal to them the real mystery, which is the act coming directly from God and leading to Him. This is a miracle that surpasses all natural relationships and states. There is a deep meaning here, and an enormous power is hidden in this mystery. It is the spirit that is primary here, not matter. Matter is only an additional means. Anastasia, yes, love conquers all. I have to ask you several more of the reader's questions which at the moment, unfortunately, are still traditional. Is it possible for the modern human to change? Rigdon, quite so. It's just that a human does not know much about his abilities. Anastasia, what can hold a person back from cognizing? Rigdon, it is mostly fear from the animal nature, fear of the unknown, that excites imagination the most. But this fear exists only until the unknown becomes known. In order to know the unknown, you must be interested in it and you must expand the scope of your thinking. Otherwise, how can a person see anything new if his thinking absorbs only that which is familiar to him and sets the corresponding confining frames for incoming information? A narrowed outlook and lack of deep understanding of the world also give rise to fear in man, from the animal nature, to come into contact with the eternal and lose that temporary which he has now, figuratively speaking, that very same branch to which that man from the parable is clinging to, which I mentioned earlier. Anastasia, you said that in order to cognize something, it is necessary to at least make an attempt to start cognizing it. Rigdon, yes. It is for a reason that the ancient sages used to say that in order to know the world, you must know yourself. And to know yourself, you need to get away from the usual templates of perception. After all, our inner world is much bigger and more interesting than we are used to thinking it is. Its beauty, scale, and depth cannot be known only with the usual perception. Diving into the depths of the unknown, for example, while doing meditation techniques, one can see and feel that which has always been with you and which gives you a comprehensive understanding of the world. The deepest feelings, or the so-called sixth sense, the sense of intuition that can be developed with certain meditative and spiritual practices, allow you to perceive more information than the consciousness which is limited by logic. They anticipate a situation, giving extensive knowledge about it from the perspective of the observer from the spiritual nature. After all, the real world, and not the narrow spectrum that we can see with our sight, is so multifaceted and varied that it is irrational to study it only from the perspective of a three-dimensional space. Humans' multidimensional structure enables the observer from the spiritual nature to work in various altered states of consciousness and to be in different places at the same time. This, in its turn, makes it possible to be in various alternative states, dimensions, in other words, to see or to have a variety of options in different realities. For a human, this variety of potential unrealities is manifested as long as he does not make a certain choice. The latter manifests one of the many interrelated realities with which the meditator comes into resonance. In other words, while in meditation, a person is already making changes to the given reality with his choice. Meditation is like life itself, in which personal choice creates this or that future. And there is nothing surprising here. It is just different, as of today unexplored, physics. However, research in this direction is already underway. Understanding or resolving certain scientific questions generates even more of them. For example, the answers that quantum physics finds raise questions in biochemistry, biophysics, and so on through a complex chain of interconnection and interdependence. Of this complex world, as it is known, The macrocosm is the reflection of the microcosm. In order to understand the structure, well-coordinated work, and possibilities of a macro object, you must start with studying and understanding its microcosm. Anastasia, as of today, experiments have proven that human, thanks to his phenomenal abilities, can change the polarization of light rays, the electromagnetic field, and properties of water, as well as deflect a laser beam, read information off of other objects, and so on. That is, if we look at a person, or at least at those of his abilities which science can prove today, then for understanding the mechanisms of such phenomena, it is necessary to study not only the visible but, most importantly, the invisible human structure? Rigdon, absolutely. Any material object consists of a set of chemical elements. If we speak of a human, his body holds the entire periodic table and many other undiscovered chemical elements. But what is important is that if we delve into the microcosm of human, we will find that the number of chemical elements will decrease and their interaction will become more complex. For example, if we get as deep as the size of a molecule, we can see that the number of chemical elements is reduced to just a few. With further immersion into the microcosm of the atom, chemistry disappears and quantum physics at the level of elementary particles remains. Elementary particles show properties of the boundary condition here. One and the same particle can be matter, particle, under certain conditions, and it can also be energy, wave. Besides, a number of hidden surprising properties are revealed, the interaction of particles regardless of distance and transfer of energy, and much more. But quantum physics, we can say, is also limited. It stands on the threshold of two worlds where matter, particle, transforms into energy, wave. With further immersion, quantum physics disappears and a brand new, yet unknown world begins, the multidimensional world of energies, and still further, the world of information, of the very fundamental building blocks of information referred to above, which creates matter, form, and life itself. There is this paradox, I would call it, the paradox of human. Take, for example, a middle-aged person who weighs 70 kilograms and is 1 meter 70 centimeters tall. So, if we put together all the elementary particles that make up that person, they will not even fill a small thimble and their weight will be less than 1 gram. But if we rearrange the elementary particles in their places again according to the information structure of this person at this point in time and at a given point of space, we will again get a large and heavy middle-aged person who weighs 70 kilograms and is 1 meter 70 centimeters tall. Anastasia, this is surprising. Rigdon, the question is what happens to his volume and mass? Anastasia, perhaps, the same thing that happens to the donut hole when the donut is eaten. It means that the weight of a person is also an illusion? Still, it's interesting, what creates the illusion of weight then? Rigdon, this question has an answer but it is beyond the comprehension of modern physics. But it is based on knowledge about the universe's information building blocks, of which I spoke earlier. Let us put it this way, according to a certain plan, various combinations of information blocks are created. As a result, different forms of living or non-living matter and so on are formed out of the same chemical elements. The variety of options of arranging information and the very primary origination of energies in the process of observation is created by, let us say, a super observer from the other side. People call him God, the Creator, the Supreme Intelligence, the one who, according to the mythology of the peoples of the world, created the universe and manages it. It is this super observer on whom it depends how information will be combined and, consequently, which of the energies or of its components will be converted in an elementary particle. And then depending on that, what exactly will be manifested and created in the material world, figuratively speaking, a stone beneath your feet or a star above your head. After all, everything around us, including ourselves, is composed of one and the same elements but which are connected according to different programs. And these informational programs, these primary energies, are just a manifestation of the plan of the one who created everything. The form and the combinations are different, but in spite of this, everything is interconnected with each other, all the living and the non-living interacts, that is his will, that is his idea. A human contains a particle of the one who created everything. People call it the soul. Its existence in this form, enslaved in matter, is a part of his plan because it makes no sense to create something without observing it. Just as it is valuable for a person to observe his spiritual transformations, so it is valuable for God to observe the souls. Precious is the one who has returned to him. At the same time, the freedom of choice remains with human himself. A person is free to choose any path. But everything is temporary and mortal except for the path to eternity. It is precisely the personality that, upon spiritual development and fusion with the soul, becomes an observer from the spiritual nature, which, like its creator, can, thanks to his own observation, change many things in the material world. For example, to change not just his destiny, but also destinies of other people and to create changes in the surrounding world. Anastasia, but how can the observer make changes with his observation? Rigdon, to make the answer to this question clear, let us take a journey into quantum physics. The more scientists study questions posed by the science, the more they come to the conclusion that everything is very closely interconnected in the world and exists non-locally. For example, elementary particles are interconnected. According to the theory of quantum physics, if a simultaneous formation of two particles is provoked, they will not only be in the superposition state, that is, in many places at the same time. A change of the state of one particle will also lead to an instant change of the state of the other particle, no matter how far it is located from it, even if this distance exceeds the range of action of all the natural forces known to modern mankind. Anastasia, what is the secret of this instant interconnection? Rigdon, I shall explain in a moment. Let us, for instance, take a look at the electron. It consists of information building blocks, or grains as they were called by the ancients, which define its basic characteristics and determine its inner potential, among other things. According to modern concepts, the electron moves around the nucleus of the atom as if along a stationary orbit, orbital. To be more specific, its motion is already presented not in the form of a material point with a predetermined path, but in the form of the electron cloud, a conventional image of the electron smeared throughout the whole volume of the atom, which has areas of thickening and discharge of the electric charge. The electron cloud as such has no clear boundaries. The orbit, orbital, is referred to not as a movement of the electron in a particular line but as a certain part of space, an area around the nucleus of the atom which preserves the highest probability of the location of the electron in the atom, atomic orbital, or in the molecule, molecular orbital. It is the difference between the inner potential and the external charge that creates such orbitals. The quality of the inner energy, potential, characterizes a material object. In other words, using the language of modern science, such electron shells, orbitals, of atoms determine electrical, optical, magnetic, and chemical properties of atoms and Figure 2. The electron cloud of the hydrogen atom, an area of the three-dimensional space around the atom nucleus which retains the most likely location of the electron. Molecules as well as most of the properties of solid bodies, depending on the number and the position of electrons on them. The shape of the electron cloud, as we remember from chemistry classes at school, may vary. 1, 2, 3. Figure 3. Various shapes of atomic orbitals, the geometry of quantum chemistry. S orbital is a spherical shaped atomic orbital, the circle sign. P orbital is dumbbell shaped or double pear shaped. The infinity sign. D orbital has the form of a four-petal flower, the sign of the diagonal cross. So as it is known, the electron can exist in two states simultaneously in the material world, as a particle and as a wave. It can manifest itself in different places at the same time, again, according to quantum physics. Leaving or, rather, disappearing from its nuclear orbit, the electron moves instantly, that is, it disappears here and appears on another orbit. But the most interesting thing here is what scientists do not yet know. Consider, for example, an electron of the hydrogen atom, which is an element that is part of the composition of water, living organisms, and natural resources. It is also one of the most common elements in space. The atomic orbital that surrounds the nucleus of the hydrogen atom is spherical shaped. This is what the present-day science can detect. But scientists do not yet know that the electron itself is twisted into a spiral, helix. Moreover, this helix, one and the same, can be both left-handed and right-handed, depending on the charge's location on it. It is thanks to this spiral shape and a change of location of charge concentration that this electron easily changes from the particle state to a wave and vice versa. Here is a figurative example. Imagine that you have an orange in your hands. Using a knife, you carefully remove the whole peel from it in a circle like a spiral, moving from one of its vertices, let us say conditionally, from point A to another one, point B. If you separate this peel from the orange, then in the usual folded state it will be spherical shaped, echoing contours of the orange. If stretched, it will be similar to a wave-like rope. So in our figurative example, the orange peel will represent the electron helix, on the surface of which there is an external charge in the area of point A, while the internal charge is in the area of point B on the inside, on the white side of the peel. Any external change in point A, on the orange side of the peel, will lead to the same instant internal change, but opposite in force and influence, at the point located on the white side of the peel under point B. As soon as the external electron charge decreases, the helix becomes stretched under the influence of the internal potential and the electron changes into the wave state. When the external charge reappears, which is formed due to an interaction of waves with matter, the helix compresses and the electron changes back into particle state again. In the particle state, the electron has a negative external charge and a left-handed helix, and in the wave state, it has a right-handed helix and a positive external charge. And the whole transformation happens due to isoosmos. B. 1. Figure 4. A figurative example of the electron. Transformation from a particle into a wave. The particle state. 2. The wave state. The observer from the perspective of a three-dimensional world can see the electron as a particle if certain technical conditions are created. But the observer from the perspective of higher dimensions, who will see our material world in the form of energies, will be able to observe another structure of the electron. In particular, the information building blocks that make up that electron will only show the properties of energy waves, of a stretched helix. Besides, this wave will be infinite in space. Simply put, the position of the electron is such in the overall system of reality that it will be located everywhere in the material world. Anastasia, could you say that it will exist regardless of whether we see it as observers of a three-dimensional world or not? Rigdon, yes. In order to understand this, let us consider another example with a mirror. Suppose that several fundamental information building blocks form a structure that represents a local point, some object. We put it in the middle of a room, in which a multitude of mirrors is placed at a certain angle in such a way that it is reflected in each of them. So, the object is in the middle of the room and it is reflected in every mirror. Also, we see it and, therefore, information about it exists in our minds. In short, the information about the object exists simultaneously in several places. If we remove one of the mirrors, we will not observe this object in that place. But when we return the mirror, it will reappear. So, in fact, information about it has not disappeared. It is just that we see the object under certain conditions of manifestation of information, and once conditions have changed, we no longer see it. Objectively, however, this object continues to exist in that place in terms of information. The reflection may have a continuous flow, so it means that this object exists in each point of this room, and incidentally, not only of the room but also of the space outside the limits of the room, regardless of whether we see it or not. According to quantum physics, the existence of the electron in the particle state depends on the very act of measurement or observation. In other words, the electron, which has not been measured and is not being observed, behaves not as a particle but as a wave. In this case, there is a whole field of probabilities for it, since it exists here and now in many places simultaneously, that is, in the superposition state. At that, despite the fact that the electron has multiple positions, it will be one and the same electron and one and the same wave. The superposition is the ability to simultaneously exist in all the possible alternative states until a choice is made, until the observer makes a measurement, a calculation of the given object. As soon as the observer focuses his or her attention on the behavior of the electron, the electron, immediately collapses into a particle, that is, it transforms from a wave into a material object, the position of which can be localized. In short, after the measurement, so to speak, after the choice of the observer, one object will exist only in one place. Anastasia, wow, that is interesting information. The findings of quantum physics, as it turns out, are valuable for those who are engaged in self-perfection. This explains in a way why a person fails at meditation. After all, what helps to, so to speak, materialize the process of meditation, in other words, what helps the transition from the wave state to the material state in which energy once again acquires properties of matter? It is observation and control from the animal nature. In other words, meditation fails when the mental processes which are typical of the usual everyday state of consciousness become active. In this case, the brain is always trying to identify something and localize the object of observation. This situation develops when the personality does not immerse itself sufficiently into an altered state of consciousness during a meditation or when it loses control over the state. This allows the animal nature to intervene in the process of observation. Consequently, associative images appear and the truth is lost. The wave transforms into matter. But as soon as you turn off the brain with its thought processes and fully enter into a meditation, thanks to a manifestation of your deep feelings, then an expansion of consciousness takes place and the matter observed from the spiritual nature turns into a wave. You merge with the true reality of the world, you become one with it, and at the same time you feel all of its diversity like there are many of you and you are everywhere. This is when a real meditation happens as the process of cognizing the truth. Rigdon, absolutely. The world of the animal nature is the world of dominance of matter and its laws. The world of God is the world of perfect energies. When you meditate, when you are in an altered state of consciousness, you then become a part of the process, a part of the divine manifestation here. As soon as the observer from the animal nature activates, you think that you gain control over matter. Actually, it is matter, the animal mind, that gains control over you. As a result, you become a more manifested material object. In fact, you turn into a corpuscular object of general matter, corpuscle, from Latin corpusculum meaning body, the smallest particle of matter, and obey its laws. If you switch to the wave state, you become a part of the divine manifestation in this world, that is, an observer from the spiritual nature. That is why it is said, what you have more of in you, so shall you be. In the state of meditation, ordinary perception disappears. The consciousness of an experienced practitioner, particularly if we consider his or her state in the lotus flower's spiritual practice, expands beyond the boundaries of the familiar world. The person feels that he is simultaneously everywhere. You can say that the superposition of quantum physics, an acquisition of the wave state, is the same as an acquisition in a meditation of the state of exit to higher dimensions in which matter is already absent. The superposition in the state of meditation is when you see, meaning that you feel the whole world and its diverse manifestations with the deepest feelings. But as soon as the observer focuses on an object, his consciousness becomes narrowed and limited by the observed object. That is, once you make a choice and focus on specific details, the wave transforms into matter. After all, when you concentrate on details, the comprehensive perception disappears and only details remain. Thoughts from the animal nature are a kind of a tool, a power to materialize objects, while feelings from the spiritual nature are a force for expanding consciousness and accessing higher dimensions. Anastasia, yes, how complex this world is and how obvious in it can simple things be. Rigdon, now, regarding quantum physics. On the one hand, the notion of the observer has expanded the boundaries of scientific knowledge, but on the other, it has brought them to a deadlock. After all, the perspective of the super-observer proves that a tremendous force exists, which can influence from the outside the universe, all its objects, and all the processes taking place in it. Anastasia, so in fact, this is another way to scientifically prove the existence of God. Rigdon, yes. Human has a soul as a part of the divine power. The more he transforms his inner world and the more his personality fuses with the soul, unfolding before God, the stronger he becomes spiritually and gets the ability to influence the physical world from higher dimensions. And the more such people, the greater this influence is. The super-observer is God who can influence everything. Human as an observer from the spiritual nature is the observer who can interfere in the processes of the world and change them at the micro level. Of course, certain manipulations with matter are accessible to people from the perspective of the observer from the animal nature. But a person gets the real power of influence only when his observer from the spiritual nature activates. Anastasia, when you do spiritual practices and have an expanded view of the reality of the world, you realize that this is a fact. Incredible wonders made by those who, at different times and on different continents, were considered holy, serve as proof of that. Because, for them, it was easy to stop the elements, to change the structure of water, to cure any disease, and even to resurrect people from the dead. Rigdon, of course, people cannot even imagine what abilities are embedded in them. Observation is the first step to knowing the hidden secrets. We influence a particular situation, its possible outcome, and a resolution in the world that is invisible to us by the fact of contemplating from the perspective of the observer from the animal nature or from the spiritual nature since we make a choice. Each situation is a kind of an answer not only to your presence in this place here and now, but also to how exactly you are observing yourself in this moment. Anastasia, in essence, we observe a part of ourselves in what surrounds us, and it is not the reality of the world that we judge, but the way we interpret it according to our experience and our understanding of the world. Rigdon, that's right. By expressing something about the world, we essentially express something about ourselves. A good listener will always hear a lot more about the speaker than he intends to reveal about himself. Anastasia, in other words, one way or another, we see the outside world through a kind of rose-colored glasses of the observer from the animal nature. The less we work on transforming our inner world, the worse it is for us. Because what will grow more, in this case, is just the experience related to the domination of the observer from the animal nature, which means that we will get an even more distorted picture of the perception of the world. Rigdon, yes. This, incidentally, can be traced even from the perspective of the existing knowledge about the brain, consciousness, person's way of thinking, and the way his worldview is formed. As a rule, in a consumer society, certain attitudes are instilled into a person from birth that the world is material and supposedly this is the only reality existing for humans. I have already said that our brain is set up in such a way that it adapts to various behavior patterns very quickly. Moreover, it will thereafter be based on them until the person chooses some new ones. Thus, a person begins to build his life from childhood, in essence, based on the wrong settings and a one-sided view of the world from the perspective of the observer from the animal nature. He simply ignores anything that does not correspond to his patterns and his personal choice. He chooses a kind of a very narrow life range of perception of the world and himself, while not even interested in anything more. As a result, people use trite associations and become quite predictable in their actions and intentions. What does that selective information from the outside world, the larger part of which comes from vision, represent? What we see, according to that same quantum physics, is an illusion generated by the geometry of space. In the usual state of consciousness, we perceive the world not from the perspective of a detached space observer or another observer, but from the perspective of the observer who is steeped in this three-dimensional world and is placed at specific coordinates, at a given point in time. That is why we will perceive the world one-sidedly, only from this point, and there will be distortions in this case. We see even our bodies as a three-dimensional image perceived by our brain that is tuned to a state of consciousness that is habitual for us. If we change the state of consciousness and, for example, look at our physical bodies in the state of meditation, we will see the aura and the shells that correspond to it, basically, a completely different structure. While doing more complex meditations related to observing from higher dimensions, you can see your whole structure on a larger scale, including the parts located in other dimensions. All this, accordingly, will expand our understanding of the energy structure of a human being. In addition, we must take into account that the brain is located in the cranium, in other words, it is completely isolated from the external environment. It has no direct contact with the light of the surrounding physical space. The light that enters the eye is simply converted into an electrical signal. And it is this signal that the brain analyses and decodes, figuratively speaking, in its darkness. In other words, our brain does not see the real picture, or rather the illusion of the geometry of a given space, but only a signal converted from the outside, an electric copy of the image visible in the limited range of perception. Anastasia, generally speaking, this is an electric copy of the state of the observed objects of a moment that already passed. Moreover, this copy cannot be called even a fragment of information out of the variety of the visible. And, of course, the invisible world. And man still delusively thinks that he knows this world and understands it.